Time to read about Japan. Okay. Japan. Capitalist states put indirect pressure on women to have or not have children, depending on man's perception of the need. High taxes and expensive education, medical care, housing, and food lower the birth rate. Men's perception in the 1980s that middle-class white women were not having enough children. Control of women's bodies always has a racist component, led to a spate of movies and television programs stressing the joys of motherhood and the motherly capacities of men. Israel used financial incentives to increase childbearing, and Japan offered women a reward of 5,000 yen a month, $38, for each child of preschool age and double for a third child. Japan is overcrowded, but its ruling men are worried about the plummeting birth rate. It is hard to say which is more outrageous, men's indifference to the conditions in which women raise children, or the paltry sum they think will persuade them to have more. Japanese women told a reporter who bothered to ask them that their reluctance to have children was a rebellion against an oppressive system. Education and housing are very expensive, daycare non-existent, and husbands never home. Japanese men return home exhausted about midnight. For recreation, they play video games or sports, or take sex tours to Southeast Asia. The life of a wife and mother is not enviable, and many women defer or eschew marriage. Yuriko Marumoto, a physician and mother who has vocally opposed the bonus plan, explains, "Our politicians and business leaders only go home late at night. They don't know how kids are raised or what family life is like. Our political system is controlled by men who know nothing about the kitchen or the home." Before the church-driven campaign to criminalize abortion penetrated the government, the United States quietly worked to sterilize populations it considered undesirable. Many Southern Black, especially in North Carolina, Native American, and Hispanic women. In 1972 alone, clinics used federal funds to sterilize 100,000 to 200,000 people in the United States. Hitler managed to sterilize only 250,000 in his entire regime. Over 35% of Puerto Rican women of childbearing age were sterilized in the 1970s, and 24% of Native American women of childbearing age by 1976. Now, a movement has emerged in supposedly liberal circles to control the way women reproduce. Powerful, widespread, but unadmitted, it is being conducted by groups with different agendas, which literally persecute pregnant women, mainly the poor, under the guise of medical, legal, or ethical concern. I will discuss it in Part 2, Institutional Wars Against Women, in a section dealing with women's treatment by the medical and judicial systems. Community wars against women's bodies. As patriarchal ideas took hold 4,000 or 5,000 years ago, and men created states, one of their first acts in every state was to define women by their sexuality and constrict them within it. They were not concerned with female but male desire. They also wanted to appropriate female reproductive capacities. They forced women into the position of domesticated animals, which men could breed, train, buy, sell, and grow rich from. To this end, they used religious or philosophical propaganda to train women to be docile, tractable, penned in like cows, pigs, or sheep. While training women to such subservience should have been easy, if men's definition of women as an inferior species was accurate, it was immeasurably complicated by women's possession of minds, emotions, talents, and spirit. Not only did women continue to express themselves, but men sometimes loved and admired them, which added to the difficulties of control. A conflict within an individual man between affectionate respect for a woman and a drive to control her may reach any of a wide gamut of resolutions. But in organized societies, communities, institutions, or states, the drive to control always wins. Man's first step to control was the establishment of patrilineal, which overturned the ancient tradition of naming children for the known parent, the mother. Tracing children's descent through the male line gave men an excuse to guard women's sexuality by forcing them into marriage and childbearing at very young ages, which Adrian Rich calls compulsory heterosexuality. They killed or enslaved women for losing virginity, even if they were raped, put them in purdah, denied them rights to divorce or child custody, and killed them for abortion or extramarital sex. None of these constraints were ever imposed on men. Men were killed for adultery in some societies, but only for having usurped another man's property, his wife, not for having sex with women other than their wives. In many societies, men had the legal right to order abortions or to expose infants or have them killed after birth. In all societies, men could have multiple sex partners, sometimes multiple wives, could initiate divorce at will, and were given custody of children. Only patrilineal societies were exogamous, required marriage into a different clan, and only exogamous groups were patrilocal, requiring women to move to their husband's community. Patrilocality enabled men to isolate women amongst strangers, deprive them of the solidarity of their kin, and deprive them of property rights. In such an environment, men could abuse women with impunity. As these customs spread, women increasingly became commodities for men's use. Men exploited them, enslaved them, forced them into concubinage, or into sati or other kinds of disposal of widows that allowed men to keep their property. By depriving women of the right to own property, men forced them to marry to survive. The control was circular and total. We need this context to understand a form of control of women's bodies rarely discussed and considered inflammatory: genital mutilation. Genital mutilation. Many people associate genital mutilation of women with Islam. Muslims resent this. Islam did not initiate the practice, which is also followed by Christians and animists. Indeed, in 80% of the present Islamic world, including Saudi Arabia, Iran, Lebanon, Algeria, Jordan, Tunisia, and much of Muslim Asia, girls do not undergo genital mutilation. Most Egyptians who practice it live in the Nile Valley, suggesting a pharaonic origin, but it is also true that a large percentage of genitally mutilated women are Muslim, and while Islam as a religion does not encourage it, some Islamic leaders do. Moreover, infibulation, its most devastating and dangerous form, is practiced only by Muslims so far as we know. Wherever it exists, it is systemic, and it exists in many places. Scholars estimate that at present over 20 million women are genitally mutilated. God damn it, I don't want to read about this shit. Female genital mutilation is sometimes called female circumcision, as if paralleled male circumcision, but they are not parallel. Male circumcision does no good, but it usually does no harm. On rare occasions, the surgeon's hand slips and cuts a baby's penis or a baby's eyes from the operation, though some believe that removal of the prepuce keeps the penis cleaner or protects a man and his sexual partners against cancer. There is no evidence that male circumcision produces any advantage whatever on any ground. However, circumcision does not deform a male's genital organs or impede sexual pleasure or any other penile function, but even the mildest form of female circumcision can kill a girl. In all forms, it deforms the female genital organs, and it usually leaves women unable to experience orgasm or sexual excitement. And in its severest form, often leads to agonized sexual intercourse and childbirth, illness, or death. There are several forms of female genital mutilation. Circumcision, suna. Removal of the sheath, prepuce, and the tip of the clitoris. Suna means tradition in Arabic. This mildest of mutilations is called suna in Muslim countries, perhaps because it is the form known by Muhammad. Excision, clitoridectomy. In this operation, the entire clitoris is removed. Usually parts of the labia minora, the small lips surrounding the vagina, are also cut away. Sometimes cuts are made around the vagina to make childbirth easier. In fact, such cutting makes childbirth more difficult and painful. Infibulation, pharaonic circumcision. This operation is called pharaonic because it was originally performed in Upper Egypt. The term infibulation comes from the Romans, who sometimes fastened a ring or clasp, fibula, through the large genital lips of slave women to keep them from having intercourse and bearing children. The practice may have been extended from animal husbandry, for exactly the same thing is done to female animals like mares and cows if their owners do not want them to procreate while they are free at pasture. The Romans also fixed such a ring through the foreskin of males they wanted to avoid sex, usually gladiators. Today, infibulation is practiced only by Muslims. Infibulation of women involves removing the prepuce, the clitoris, and the labia minora, and scraping the flesh from the labia majora and sewing them together. Sometimes flesh is also scraped from the inside of the vagina. A tiny opening is left to allow discharge of urine and menstrual blood. Often a reed is placed in this opening and the girl's legs tied together until the wound heals. When she is married, the merged flesh has to be cut open to allow the penis to enter. Some groups make the opening tiny to increase male sexual pleasure. Whether it does that or not, it does increase female pain during intercourse. At childbirth, the opening has to be made larger. A husband may order his wife re-sewn after each child or whenever he goes on a journey. In childbirth, the labia and inside walls of the vagina expand to allow natural stretch, and if they are removed, childbirth is agonizing. Female readers can imagine what mutilation must mean during sexual intercourse. A removal of the clitoris in all except suna circumcision means a woman can never experience sexual excitement, pleasure, or orgasm. I don't know if that's really true though. Some women, Some women claim to experience sexual pleasure after excision, but it is difficult to get firm information about this. In parts of the world that practice genital mutilation, women are taught to be modest and have trouble speaking about such subjects, even to female researchers. These operations are usually performed with unsterile, even rusty knives, splinters of glass, or razors. Midwives or sometimes male barbers perform them. Physicians describe the following consequences from these operations. Immediate consequences: agonizing pain, no anesthetic is used, hemorrhage, shock, inability to urinate, urinary infection, blood poisoning or tetanus from unsterilized instruments, fever, death from any of these. Some girls' bones are fractured by the force used to hold them down during the operation. Later consequences: if the wound Heal slowly. What is that? Is it just like... The girl may develop infection, anemia, or malnutrition. She may develop a pelvic infection, cysts, or abscesses, or may become unable to menstruate because of a scar covering the vagina. This leads to the accumulation of menstrual fluid in the vagina and uterus and can cause pelvic infection or congestion. She is likely to find intercourse painful because of a tight vaginal opening, pelvic infection, or injury to the vulval area. In some societies, it is customary for the husband to thrust his penis violently into his bride's vagina as soon as she has been cut open. Quantities of her blood are considered a sign of his prowess. Some women develop recurrent urinary tract infections and painful urination. If the vaginal opening is uncomfortably tight, or if a husband has had his wife sewn up after child weaning, he may enter her anus, which can lead to anal incontinence and fissure. Hot anal is okay though. It is also the most efficient method of spreading AIDS, which is epidemic in Africa, where genital mutilation is most common. Consequences for childbirth. Can people hear me? Like, I steady hear people moving around. I feel like I'm talking really loud, but like I also don't, but the rooms are mad close together. I'll just try to be quiet for a minute. Then I'll forget about it. Consequences for childbirth. Scar tissue is far tougher than ordinary flesh. If a woman's genital scar is extremely tough, the baby will not be able to emerge without a long, painful delivery. Sometimes the baby's head will thrust through the perineum. Infibulated women experience agonizing deliveries because the natural easements of birth have been removed. Children may be stillborn or brain damaged because of protracted labor and lack of oxygen. Sometimes the baby's head, unable to move downward in its natural course, bangs against the posterior wall of the bladder, leaving the mother with a damaged organ, through which urine seeps so that she constantly smells of it. This urine will kill later fetuses. If labor is severe enough, the uterus itself may descend into the vagina. Sometimes other organs, the bladder or rectocolon, are also thrust through the vagina. This is like, I don't want to read about this. Genital mutilation of women is equivalent not to circumcision, but to castration. But horrible as castration is for man, eunuchs suffer less than mutilated women because they do not later have to accept a penis into or give birth through mutilated organs. A woman's bodily structure allows her to reproduce even if her external genitals have been removed. History of female genital mutilation. We can only touch on the history of female genital mutilation here. Its origins are essentially unknown. Some scholars believe it began in Africa and was adopted by Islam when it conquered Egypt in 742 CE. Others that it began in the Arabian Peninsula, and still others that it arose in many places independently. Its spread follows that of Islam down the coast of West Africa and eastward across the belt of the Sudan to Pakistan, India, Malaysia, and Indonesia. In many regions it is practiced only by Muslims, but Islamic influence cannot explain its practice by some Australian Aborigines. Some doctors claim they found signs of clitoridectomy on Egyptian mummies of the 16th century BCE. Researchers have found no sign of infibulation in pre-dynastic or later Egyptian mummies. A Greek physician, Aetius, wrote approvingly 502 to 575 CE of excision, saying the clitoris should be removed before it grows too large. As he describes the process, the girl sits on a chair, her legs held open by someone sitting behind her, and a surgeon standing in front seizes the clitoris with a large forceps and pulls it out. Paul or Paulus of Aegina, a 7th century CE Greek physician, defended excision, saying an enlarged clitoris was a shameful thing that could erect like a penis and could be used for lesbian coitus. A traveler in the Sudan in 1843, describing infibulation, reported that a wood or clay model measured to the husband's erect penis was given to the operator to cut open the bride's infibulation. Anthropologist Ashley Montague gives a more graphic and horrifying account of this. When a girl whose virginity has been preserved in such a revolting manner becomes a bride, further cruelties are practiced. One of the women who perform infibulation visits the bridegroom immediately before marriage in order to obtain exact measurements of his member. She then makes to measurement a sort of phallus of clay or wood, and by its aid incises the scar for a certain distance and leaves the instrument wrapped round with a rag in the wound in order to keep the edges from adhering. Again, the wedding feast is celebrated with hideous din. The man leads his bride home. Every step she takes means pain. Without giving the fresh wound time to heal or scar, he exercises his marital privileges. Clitoridectomy was widely practiced in Europe and the United States, especially during the second half of the 19th century. Dr. Isaac Baker Brown, one of the most prestigious gynecological surgeons in England, seems to have introduced the practice there mainly to cure masturbation. Finding his claims fraudulent, most British doctors abandoned the practice by 1867, but physicians in the United States went on performing it and extended it to include oophorectomy, removal of the ovaries. E. Wallerstein writes that thousands of women had this operation in the 1870s. Doctors maintained that excision cured sexual deviations like masturbation and nymphomania. It was unthinkable that any decent woman should derive pleasure from sex. They claimed the venereal excitement incident to setting the treadle sewing machine in motion could make women ill. What? They probably also found women riding horses astride dangerous. After 1880, surgical removal of the ovaries declined, but clitoridectomy continued on a large scale, primarily to eliminate lesbianism, a suspected inclination, or simply aversion to men. Proclaiming that the sexuality of the young women did not reside in the sexual organs, a Boston surgeon in 1897 asserted that female orgasm was a disease and the removal of erectile organs like the clitoris a necessity. It was often performed in mental hospitals until 1935. Doctors in America were willing to perform even infibulation into the 20th century to keep females from masturbating. Holt's Diseases of Infancy and Childhood, 1936, recommended cauterization or removal of the clitoris to cure masturbation in girls. Fran Hoskin, who first revealed the dimensions of female genital mutilation, cites a 1982 issue of the New National Black Monitor, an American Sunday supplement, which published an editorial proposing using excision and infibulation to eliminate premarital sexual activity by teenage girls in the United States. Scholar Lillian Passmore Sanderson writes that both are still performed in the United States and Europe. Researchers have tried during the past few decades to learn more about excision and infibulation in Africa and Asia, but their efforts are often frustrated. Wherever it is practiced, it is secret. Researchers are seen as intruders, infidels, or Westerners bent on converting the world to their own vision. Good point. Fran Hoskin, who stumbled on a reference to it in 1973, has spent the years since trying to discover more about it, arousing the hostility of traditional Africans and Muslims by heroically insisting on pursuing her investigations and publishing her findings. That we know what we do about genital mutilation is due largely to her. Justifications for female genital mutilation. Societies offer different rationalizations for excising females. Some say the vulva smells foul and makes the female body unclean. This justification arises from women hatred. The genitals of both sexes have an odor. Indeed, odor may help arouse desire as it seems to in animals, but only women's is found objectionable by some male authors and advertisers touting vaginal sprays, when in fact men often have a stronger odor because they urinate and ejaculate from the same orifice and rarely clean it afterward, but there has never been a performed penile spray. It is possible that mutilated women cease to secrete the dewy vaginal fluid that signals sexual excitement, but infibulation probably increases odor or makes it foul by trapping body fluids in the created pocket of flesh. Thus, mutilation may increase rather than eliminate women's odor, reversing the declared intention. Many people justify mutilation on the ground that female genitalia are repugnant or ugly. Extreme largeness, hypertrophy of the clitoris is often mentioned as a reason for excision, especially in Ethiopia. Yet a gynecologist who examined thousands of Ethiopian women over many years asserts that clitoral hypertrophy is no more common among Ethiopian women than any others, and workers at the largest family planning organization in Addis Ababa, interviewed by Hoskin, had not seen any cases of clitoral hypertrophy. Some societies believe that an unexcised clitoris will grow as large as a penis. Others, like the Temnes, Mandingos, Limbas, and Lakos of Sierra Leone, the Bambara of Mali, and some Hausa of northern Nigeria, who know the clitoris will not grow to hang down between the legs, still find it ugly. Extremely large clitorises may exist, but even if they were common, what makes a society see them as ugly? Is the penis ugly? Yes. Are testicles beautiful? No. What could be more ugly than the scars of mutilation? Men interviewed by Hoskin intimated that they were more upset by the symbolism of a large clitoris. Seeing the clitoris as analogous to the penis, they were unsettled by a large one and threatened by women possessing the organ that was their seal of superiority. The real ground of their upset may be their knowledge that the clitoris is the superior organ. Women's sexual organ is compact, protected, and unique. It has no other function but producing sexual pleasure. Clitoral stimulation does not depend on a penis. It is in a woman's own control. Justifications on the ground of aesthetics make no sense. They conceal resentment and envy of the female's body, power, and autonomy. An even more absurd set of justifications concerns health. For instance, the Masi of Burkina Faso and some Nigerian groups believe the clitoris can kill a baby if its head touches the organ during parturition. Others believe that clitoral secretions kill sperm and that a woman cannot become pregnant unless she is mutilated. 19th and early 20th century Western physicians taught that cutting out sexual organs improved women's health, curing masturbation, depression, melancholia, nymphomania, hysteria, insanity, epilepsy, kleptomania, and truancy. In fact, all women suffer horribly from the operation. It makes many ill for the rest of their days and kills some immediately or later. It probably does cure masturbation. What is shocking is that masturbation should be considered a disease. Nor do babies die from touching. If they do, their mother's clitoris is at birth. And far from increasing fertility, mutilation impedes it for reasons cited above. However, mutilation does tend to preserve virginity, a prerequisite for marriage in all traditional African and Muslim societies. Because men in some societies will not marry unmutilated girls, parents feel it necessary to mutilate them. Most mothers explain mutilation as custom, unquestioned, traditional. Girls are mutilated because they always have been. Wholeness would make them separate, different, outcasts in the community. Even mothers who do not believe the justifications offered for mutilation know its pain and danger inflicted on daughters to save them from being social outcasts. Some groups believe mutilation increases male pleasure in sex. Others say a clitoris makes men reach orgasm too quickly before they wish to, diminishing their control over intercourse, and control is a male prerogative. Though some hold that the tightness of the opening in infibulated women excites men, sometimes the opening is so tight that intercourse is impossible. In any case, if William Blake is right, what lovers want most from each other is lineaments of gratified desire, something a man can never get from a mutilated woman. Most men interviewed in Sierra Leone said they preferred sex with whole women. Of 300 Sudanese husbands interviewed by a Muslim doctor, 266 admitted they preferred whole women. That's such a weird term for what this is, sexually. Yet they would rather marry a guaranteed virgin, guaranteed to remain faithful, than a woman who gives them greater sexual pleasure. Indian Muslim women in Delhi gave me another reason for mutilation: religious salvation. Extremely poor, they could not afford the ceremony to mutilate their daughters and lamented that the girls would never go to paradise. Were they sure of this? Oh, yes, the Muslim teacher had told them so. These women had no education, were illiterate. Were they circumcised? Yes, certainly. And was it not a loss? They were bewildered. Loss? What could possibly be lost? Pleasure, I explained to the translator. Pleasure during sex. Such embarrassment followed that no answer could be extracted. But from the astonished looks on their faces, I suspected they did not know women could enjoy sex. They finally declared, "Sexual pleasure is male." This was also the justification used by Christian Kenyans whose girls, Hanny Lightfoot Klein writes, submit to the mutilation at puberty, believing that if they do not, they will be condemned to eternal hellfire. Virginity, fidelity, and suppression of desire mean taming. Many people, the Nubians for example, believe girls, but not boys or men, are wayward, sexually wild. Girls must be mutilated to make good wives. The operation teaches a female her place, makes her docile, passive. A man need not worry about a mutilated wife chasing other men, since she has no sexual desire. This protects the family. M.B. Assad writes that Islam supports or sanctions the practice explicitly to attenuate women's sexual desire and to strengthen men's control of virginity and chastity. Millions believe that women must be protected not from their own wildness but from men. So a Muslim doctor defends ancient Arabs who practice infibulation to protect girls who were out alone shepherding against attacks by men. Yet, infibulation is far more savage than most rapes. And even an infibulated female can be raped by a man with a knife. Oh my God, Protection is a reason often given for mutilations, which again means protection of the family. This shit is like, oh my god. Okay, I think we almost did. All accounts of present-day genital mutilation in Asia and Africa describe women as in charge of the surgery and supporting its necessity. They accept this horror because it gains them and their daughters acceptance by their society and their religion. But women only seem to be in control of the practice. Men will not marry an unmutilated girl, and girls must be married to survive in these parts of the world. Ergo, mutilation is mandatory. Community wars to eradicate females. Amartya Sen describes a phenomenon that would be called genocide if it were aimed at an ethnic group: eradication of females. In an article entitled "More than 100 million women are missing," Sen calculates the number of females who would have existed if female fetuses were not selectively aborted, and if female babies given the same food and medical care as males in their countries. When the sexes are not given extremely unequal care, females outlive males because nature favors the female. From conception to birth and throughout life, females seem more resistant to disease and hardier than males. With the same nutrition and medical care, they live noticeably longer than males, even though men are privileged by greater access to resources because of more education, better jobs, and higher prestige, and have fewer burdens. No menstruation, pregnancy, or childbirth, or usually child rearing. In places where the sexes receive relatively equal care, like Europe or the United States and Japan, the ratio of female to male is 1.06 to 1. Even in sub-Saharan Africa, where women are dying of hunger, they outnumber men by 101 to 1. To 100. So there's like not really a difference. It doesn't matter if they receive equal care or not. I don't know. It's weird. I don't know. Thus, a population with more males than females can occur only by design. In India, consistently more females than males die in all age groups, except immediately following birth, until the late 30s, because girls are not fed enough or given adequate medical care. In most Indian families, men eat first. The women eat what is left, feeding girls last. Men often leave almost nothing for the women. Some Indian construction workers I spoke to whispered that they hid a little food for themselves before they fed their husbands. They felt guilty about this, but their men never left any food for them. The women were spectral. Throughout this century, the proportion of women to men in India has steadily declined from over 97 females to 100 males in 1901, to 93 to 100 in 1971, to 92 to 100 in 1991. Pakistan has 94 females per 100 males, the lowest ratio of any large country except India. This disproportion is caused by attitudes toward women, not poverty. The Punjab and Haryana, two of India's richest states, have 86 women to 100 men. Kerala, which is poorer but has a matricentric tradition, has a ratio over 103 to 100. Indonesia and Thailand are as poor as India, and female-to-male ratios there are among the lowest in the world, yet females still substantially outnumber males. So many females are being killed that women, until recently 51% of the world's population, are no longer a majority. A 1991 UN publication reports that the elimination of females in places like India, Pakistan, Albania, and United Arab Emirates, 48.3 women to 100 men, offsets the female majority in developed countries to make males the majority of the world's population. This phenomenon cannot be correlated with the wealth of a region, but may have economic roots. Sen argues that females get a larger share of a family's resources if women earn wages outside the home, if their work is recognized as productive, which usually requires cash income, or if they have economic rights or resources of their own. That is, in regions where adult women can earn wages, regardless of the region's economic state, men kill fewer baby girls. The Punjab, India's richest state, has the lowest ratio of women to men and the lowest ratio of women who work for wages in India. In economically developing regions, the life expectancy of both sexes increases, but the women's gain is less than men's because men get more and better food and medical care. Comparing the proportion of women who work for wages and female life expectancy in regions of Africa and Asia, excluding China, Sen found an almost perfect correlation. Sen lists the two scales in descending order. So it's just like it's just perfect correlation. After the Communist Revolution in China, the new leaders made an effort to improve women's lot. They forced employers to hire women for wage work, acknowledged women's contribution to society and the economy, and made health care accessible to the poor. Everyone's life expectancy grew. Even during the famines of 1958 to 61, after the failure of the Great Leap Forward, the average lifespan in China around 1950 was the low 40s. By 1979, it was the high 60s. Chinese females could expect to live significantly longer than males until the government introduced economic and social reforms in 1979. China introduced reforms in 1979 to increase its rate of economic growth and end agricultural stagnation. Worried by a huge burgeoning population in a country in which only a small percentage of the land is arable, in 1980 Chinese authorities limited couples to one child. Agricultural output doubled by 1986, yet mortality rates increased, mainly because the people were killing female children. The Chinese, like most people in the world, prefer boys, and baby girls were being aborted, killed at birth, or dying from neglect. The female-to-male ratio declined drastically. By 1982, one village in Hubei province had 503 boys to 100 girls under the age of 1. Wuhan, one of China's largest cities and so under more immediate government control, had 154 male to 100 female children under 1 that year. But even before this decree, China had a very low ratio of women to men. The Chinese Statistical Yearbook for 1979 showed 94.32 females to 100 males. It declined to 93.42 to 100 in 1985 to 86. In 1989, it rose to 93.98, still below 1979 levels. Infant mortality for girls increased hugely from an estimated 37.7 per 1,000 in 1978 to 67.2 per 1,000 in 1984. Sen believes this estimate is exaggerated, but not the trend. Although China enjoyed more prosperity in this period, it cut back health services, especially in rural areas. Programs supposedly gender neutral, affecting both sexes equally, never are in women-hating cultures. And women suffered more than men from this cutback. The economic system, introduced in 1979, reverted to the traditional division of labor. Women work in the household, men outside it. Fewer women were hired for wages in agriculture. Experts have also noted that since 1979, Chinese leaders no longer discuss female equality. In trying to control population growth, both the Chinese and Indian governments concentrated mainly on women, sometimes forcibly sterilizing or aborting them. One understands the need to limit population, but the form used to do so is discriminatory. This may not be immediately apparent because we are so used to state control of female reproduction. Population control can be gender neutral, as when China taxes or fines urban families for producing more than one child, or industrial states penalize prolific couples indirectly by raising standards of care and the cost of providing it. To understand the discrimination in state policies regarding reproduction, imagine a government forcibly sterilizing men or allowing their mothers or wives or sisters to lock them up, beat them, or castrate them for sexual behavior. Indian women are being subjected to a new atrocity. Whoa. Despite laws discouraging the practice of dowry, women still need a dowry to marry. Families agree to a given sum, but after the marriage, the husband's family often blackmails the bride to squeeze more out of hers. A television set, a motorcycle, a wristwatch for the groom. A woman's life is valued no more than this. A bride may commit suicide to save her family from these demands, knowing that if they are not met, the husband's family may kill her, usually by holding her over the cooking stove so her sari catches fire and she burns to death. Then they can begin the process of buying a new wife for their son. Indian historian Veena Oldenburg calls bride burning a new form of capital accumulation. Hundreds of thousands of young women have been murdered this way in recent years. Families whose daughters-in-law have thus perished have no trouble obtaining new ones and new dowries from families eager to dispose of their daughters. Nor are the police concerned with murdered women. They rarely do post-mortems after suspicious deaths and almost never prosecute the murderers. Even limiting discussion to abortion of female fetuses, murder of baby girls, or neglect unto death. Sen estimates that over 100 million females have been killed in these regions of the world. This does not include women killed in dowry deaths, women who die of starvation because of malcontrol of land and development policies in African countries, or women in the West killed by husbands, lovers, rapists, or fellow workers. The total figure of women who die unnecessarily, felled not by disease or accident, but by men's purposeful policy, cannot be estimated. If this figure referred to a religious, ethnic, or racial group, we would be using the term genocide. What can we call this? And the end of part 1. Next is part 2, institutional wars against women.